Welcome everyone to Information Interviewing for Networking and Career Planning. Welcome to this webinar from Monash University Alumni. I'm your host Gary Ryan from Organisations That Matter, and our guest presenter today, who will be doing most of the talking, is Tonya Wimhurst, a careers education consultant at Monash University. Just a few housekeeping points as we go through today's webinar. The duration of the webinar is up to 1 hour's duration, so we'll have an opportunity for you to enter some questions. So you have a control panel in the top right-hand corner of your screen. If you'd like to enter some questions at any stage as we go through, please type them in there and I will feed them through to Tonya as we go. Or if I'm aware that Tonya is planning to answer that question a little bit later on, I might send you a little message back to let you know that. So please use that console as we work through today's webinar. Please take notes. These are educational forums, so please take notes using whatever tools you require, whether that be the traditional pen and paper or an iPad or something along those lines. Please do so. And finally, this webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded next week to the Monash site so that you can access it and review it. Welcome, Tonya. How are you going?
I'm going really well. I'm very excited to be here.
It's terrific to be working with you today. So let's start at the start. What is networking?
Okay, so today's session, as you said, Gary, is about information interviewing. So information interviewing is a networking technique. So what I think is really important to do to kick off today is to just have a really quick brainstorm and reflection about what networking is and what that means. So a really good definition is networking is a process whereby you develop relationships with others for mutual benefit. So the word that's really important in that definition is mutual.
Yes.
Now, the concept of networking is actually really a terrifying one for a lot of people, and I come across a lot of arguments against networking. For example, a lot of students and clients I work with say that, Tonya, I feel embarrassed. I feel embarrassed to network. I feel embarrassed to ask for help. So the first thing I want to say, you should never feel embarrassed. We all have to start somewhere when it comes to starting out in our career. So there is absolutely nothing to be embarrassed about. Sometimes I hear that I feel like I'm using people. Now, as I said in that first definition, networking is mutual. And I know when you're first starting out, it feels like you're the one that's being needy. But as you go along in your career, you will find opportunities will come up where you can pay back favours. And you'll just have to take my word for that one if you are early in your career, but I promise you, you will be able to, I guess, pay people back for times when they've helped you out. Now, the other thing I guess people often say to me is that they feel uncomfortable with networking because they feel like it's a hard sell. They feel like they're being almost like car salesmen, where they're sort of promoting themselves as a product. And to a certain extent, I guess that is what you're doing, but it doesn't need to be a hard sell. Networking is about building connections and building professional relationships. So just a couple of other points, I guess, just to give a little bit of weight to what I've been saying, and I'm sure a lot of you who are watching this have heard this back before, and that is that the majority of jobs are never advertised, and it's actually estimated that it's around about the 70% mark of positions that are never advertised. So I think that's really important to be aware of, because most people will look for work on Seek. They'll look for job listings there, but the reality of that is when you're looking on Seek, you're looking at the minority of job opportunities with the majority of job seekers. So networking is really important. And in some industries, networking is the only way to get into those professions. So media, arts, for example, it's all about who you know. So that's really, really important. And the last point I want to make there too is networking is not something you just do when you need a job. Networking is something that you should be doing throughout your entire professional life.
Yes. That's a really important point, Tony, that people don't realise that you need to be networking throughout your career. Over the past 18 months, I've had a number of people who have finished their jobs, been made redundant, or have chosen to take redundancy packages, for example, and really weren't prepared for the journey of finding another job. They just thought it was just going to happen. And to a person, Tonya, they've said to me, you know, one of the biggest lessons I've taken away from this experience after they finally have achieved another job was that I should have been networking right throughout the period of time when I had a job, because I didn't actually have a clue that it was going to be like it is to try and get another job. And every single person, Tonya, has told me that to reinforce that fact. The other point I'd like to reinforce, that every single person who I know in that position over the last 18 months has ended up getting a job that wasn't advertised. So that 70% figure that you've just shared with everyone is absolutely true. Were you hoping to find some information out from the participants?
I am indeed. I'm very excited to sort of turn it over to our audience members now. So I'd really like to ask everyone if you could reflect on all the jobs you've ever had in your lifetime so far, and that includes part-time, casual, volunteer roles. I want you to think about if you've ever secured at least one of those roles in a way that was not through a job advertisement.
Okay, folks, we can see that we've got the poll open, so if you wouldn't mind just clicking on yes, no, or unsure. We'll give you another 20 seconds or so. I can see that the majority of you now have voted. We're getting up towards 100%, which is terrific. Tonya, you're going to be very interested with these results. Okay, we'll just give you 10 more seconds to vote. So clicking yes, no, or unsure, please. While the poll's open, you can change your vote if you got it wrong. Okay, we'll close that now. And you can see the results there, Tonya.
Excellent. So pretty close to 70%.
Very close to 70%.
Very interesting. So I guess the reason why I wanted to get everyone doing that is to maybe take some of the fear out of networking a little bit straight up. Sometimes, you know, we're networking without even realising it. It doesn't necessarily, as I said, have to be a hard sell. It's really just about identifying opportunities outside of the advertised market. So, so good to see so many of you are already experienced networkers.
So, Tonya, that really leads us to this question about information interviewing. What is that? How would you explain that to the folk listening in today?
Okay, so information interviewing is basically talking to people who are working in a job or an industry or an organisation that interests you and asking them about it. So the trick is, information interviewing is not about asking for a job. So just to give you a bit of a scenario, if you can imagine you're at a professional association networking evening, or a conference perhaps, or a presentation, and during the break you're having a cup of coffee and you look over and you see someone standing nearby wearing a name tag, and you can see that they are working for a company which is your dream employer. Now, you've got an opportunity there. You can go up and you can say to that person, "Oh my God, you work for blah blah. That is my dream employer. I am desperate to work for that company. Can you give me a job?" Now, I'm sure most of you can imagine that the response to that is not really going to be a positive one. It tends to be a really good way to shut down conversations very quickly.
Absolutely.
But if you want to approach that person and say, "Oh, you work for such and such. That's really interesting. I've done quite a bit of research. What's your role? How did you get into that position? I'd be really interested if there might be an opportunity at some point in the future where we could get together and maybe you could give me some advice." Now, when you ask people for advice, they're a lot more open to helping you out. A couple of reasons why. I think everyone likes to help others, and especially everyone remembers what it's like when you're first starting out. But also, secondly, there's an element of flattery in there as well. And that's where the whole notion of making connections and building professional relationships comes into it. So the concept of information interviewing is about finding out more about an area of work, understanding day-to-day activities of an occupation, learning how to get a foot in the door in a particular industry, finding out about skills and knowledge, learning industry jargon, which is a really important one as well, so you can start branding yourself as a professional.
Yes.
And building on your network of contacts. And, you know, that may then lead to other contacts. But ultimately, your ultimate goal with an information interview is to make a connection, to build a relationship with someone.
So Tonya, if our audience understand that, which we've had some feedback coming through saying this is already inspiring, so well done. If they understand that it is about building connections, where would they start? Where would they start this journey?
Okay, so probably a really good place to start is the least scary place, and that is starting with people you already know. So thinking about your family, friends, if you're a student, lecturers, those of you who are already involved in the mentoring program, you've already started building up your networks. Fellow students, former, past employers, co-workers, so starting with those people. And again, sometimes students are really quick to say, yeah, but I don't know anyone who can help me. But the thing is, they might know someone who can help you.
Yes.
And that tends to be where the networking magic happens. It happens in what we call the secondary circle, not necessarily the first circle of contact. So starting there is probably the best place. Then sort of building on that, once you've built up your confidence a little bit, perhaps looking at past employers of Monash students. We have some resources on the Employment and Career Development website that lists some employers there, which is a really good resource. Utilising Google, you know, even looking in yellowpages.com. No one ever thinks to use that, but that's a fantastic way to generate lists of small, medium-sized companies using business directories, industry publications. For those of you who are students, knowing what's happening on campus, that's really important. We have employers coming on campus all the time.
Yes.
Please beg us to let them come on campus and present to students. So it's really up to students to be aware of what's happening. And last of all, I think one of the most powerful tools is the professional associations. So again, you know, joining up, finding out when there's conferences, finding out when there's seminars. That's the most amazing place to meet people who can potentially help you in your particular area of expertise.
There's absolutely a huge amount of gold in that list that you've provided the audience, Tonya. How would they prepare for these interviews, say at the point in time where they've actually secured someone to speak with? How would you advise folks to prepare for these interviews?
Okay, so once you sort of feel that you've made a connection with someone and that they might be open to perhaps spending a little bit of time with you and you know, just giving you a little bit of their advice and their wisdom, I guess it is really important just to be very clear that you're wanting what you're wanting to gain from that, that you're just wanting them to help you with your career planning and your decision making. Of course, if you're approaching them cold, so if you found them through some sort of online site or through a friend of a friend, it's really important to tell them how you came across them.
Yes.
So that they can kind of work out where the connections come from, or it might even be LinkedIn, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. And again, emphasise that you're not necessarily looking to ask for a job, but you're asking them for advice and guidance. And then really it's just a simple matter of seeing if they've got a 20-minute window somewhere where they can sit down with you, preferably in person, and have a chat about that. Preferably at their office, or maybe you could meet at a cafe perhaps, somewhere like that, somewhere where they're comfortable.
Tonya, Viv asks, how can alumni who are employers connect with students and help them to practice their networking and information interviewing skills?
Well, our departments, our employment and career development, we have a unit called Industry and Community Relations, and we're always interacting with employers and organisations and helping employers organise opportunities to come on campus. We have 2 career fairs that we run per year, and we also have opportunities for employers to come on campus and do information, employer information sessions, and also they can present to students as well on career education issues.
Terrific. And in terms of the preparation, what should our audience bring to an interview, and what should they ask you, would you suggest?
Okay, so the preparation is absolutely vital. So the thing is, you've requested the interview, so you need to be prepared. And that's the thing, sometimes people get a little bit confused about an information interview versus a job interview. And I guess the main difference is an information interview is where you're doing the questioning. That's the big thing. So the first thing you need to do is you need to research the industry and the organisation before the interview. You need to look at their website, any annual reports, a really good place to get information. Do as much preparation as possible so you don't waste the interviewee's time, and also you're making a good impression on them. You're branding yourself as a professional and someone who is really keen and enthusiastic.
Yes, Tonya, folk really can't underestimate the importance of this pre-work. People will know if they're literally winging it when they get to the interview. So as you're suggesting, the preparation is critical, folks. If you don't do that, you'll actually do yourself a disservice. It's so important that you follow Tonya's advice here and make sure you do this pre-work.
Absolutely. So, yeah, so take a list of questions, and I'll go through that in a moment. Take a professional style notepad so you can make some notes. You know, even ask your interviewee if you can record your time with them as well. Sometimes they're quite open to doing that. And bring some copies of your resume. Now, don't necessarily shove them at your interviewee the minute you sit down, but it could be that they might ask you if you have a copy of your resume, in which case, again, you look prepared by having a copy. And the other thing is, having your resume there, you could ask them for feedback. Ask them for their opinion of your resume and what impression you're making with that document. But again, not necessarily, oh, here's my resume, can I have a job with you? Because that's going to undo all the good work that you've done up to that point.
Yes. So what would some of those questions be that you would recommend folk would ask, Tonya?
Okay, so we can break the different question topics down to a few different types. So the first one would be asking your interviewee about their personal experiences in the industry. So just to give you an example of a question that would fit in with that, what were the keys to your own career advancement? Now, at the end of this presentation, I'll be giving a link, or I'll be providing a link to a more extensive list of information questions that you can ask in one of these interviews. So just for now, I'll just run you through a few examples. The next topic might be to do with their day-to-day tasks. So for example, what are the most rewarding parts of your job? What are the most challenging? The next topic would be potentially to do with the skills that are required for the industry. So what abilities or personal qualities contribute most to success in this field? Getting experience, which I know is on a lot of people's minds. What kinds of experience, paid or unpaid, would you encourage someone like me pursuing a career in this field to look at? How to find jobs? What is the best way to tap into positions that are not advertised? And again, I know that's actually a question that some of you put forward in the registration, which I guess, you know, this is sort of covering in itself in the topic. What else have we got there? Advancing your career pathway potentially. How does a person progress in this field? Could you outline some of the common career paths? Would be another one.
So folks, that's why it's really valuable for you to stay with us right through to the end of this webinar so that you can get that link to those fabulous resources that Tonya has just been sharing with you. How should folk actually physically present themselves at these information interviews, Tonya?
Okay, so the way you present is absolutely vital, and it's very similar to the way you would present in a job interview. And I know there were a couple of questions about preparing for a job interview, which isn't the topic for today, but there is a lot of crossover in terms of how you make a good, positive first impression. So the first thing is, once you've set up one of these information interviews, or even if it is a job interview, you need to make sure you arrive on time. That is absolutely the most important thing. So around about 10 minutes would probably be a good goal. Next would be the way you dress and how you present yourself. And again, probably best to approach it as if you're going for a job interview. So, you know, really showing that you're dressing like a professional so that you can make a good impression. And that's what we're wanting to do, because we're wanting this person to be part of your professional network. So you need to impress them. That's really important. Smiling. Now, I know that might seem a bit obvious, but when we're nervous, smiling can be really hard. So that's something that's really important. And nothing builds a connection like a nice, friendly smile. And I'm sure we've all had those days when we've been sort of out and about and some random person has given you some big, nice smile and it's really made you feel good and lifted your spirits. And it, you know, I think physiologically there's endorphins that are released when we smile and we build that connection. So again, it helps relieve your nerves a little bit, and again, just building on that connection. Now, this is probably where things get a little bit different in terms of the job interview versus the information interview. You need, in this particular scenario, to listen more than you talk. Actively listen. Give feedback. Don't be looking around the room. Don't be checking your phone. Don't be looking at the time. You need to show this person that you're interested in what they have to say. That's really important, that communication connection. Be mindful of your body language, because again, sometimes when we're nervous, we do strange things. We might tap our feet or play with our hair or whatever the case may be, and that can be really distracting. So be very mindful of your posture as well. Posture can communicate a lot in terms of confidence, and again, you're wanting to impress this person, so you're wanting to portray yourself as a confident professional. So sitting tall is really important, and holding yourself in a tall posture is vital. And last of all, being really in tune with your interviewee. If they seem fidgety, if they seem to be looking around the room or checking the time, then either you're talking too much or they're uncomfortable with the topic, or you may have exceeded the time limit. So be very respectful of their time. If you have said you want 20 minutes with them, keep it to 20 minutes. Very important. Eye contact, again, is just another point. You know, maintaining that eye contact, that's part of active listening. And the other thing, very important, regardless of networking, job interview, whatever the situation, turn off your mobile phone.
Yes. Just to reinforce some of your points there, Tonya, I know with the work that I do with employers, and I have a lot of employers who are my clients, they say that with a lot of young professionals, one of the most frustrating experiences that they have is their lack of timeliness. So your first point there about making sure you're there and on time actually makes you stand out, because unfortunately these days so many people are not on time. So it's a really simple way to make yourself stand out. The listen more than you talk as well, a simple rule that I've found useful for a lot of folk is have the interviewee be talking 70% of the time compared to your 30% of the time. That's like a nice little guideline to use for you. And as you've said, Tonya, make sure that you're dressing appropriately for the industry where you're going to go, so you've got that first impression, and being aware of both yourself and your interviewees' body language are absolutely critical. How should people approach the handshake?
The handshake is so important because it's the first physical connection that you make with the person. And it's part of business. It's just part of what we do when we have jobs and when we're meeting people. So the handshake makes a real impression. So just a couple of things. I guess not everyone's comfortable with handshakes for whatever reason that might be. It might be cultural differences. It might be just that it's not something that is familiar to you at this stage, whatever the case may be. And sometimes as a result, we come across a handshake that we call floppy fish, which is the fingertip handshake, which is really quite unpleasant. So really important that you want to avoid that kind of handshake. So a good handshake should be a good, firm, full hand. Okay, so that's quite important. So you can see in some of those examples there of what not to do. The other thing is you don't want to turn the person over so that you're putting your hand on top of theirs, because that's what we call a power shake, indicating that you're wanting to dominate. On the other hand, pardon the pun, you don't want to turn yourself under either, because that's indicating a submissive personality. So there's quite a lot of actual body language theories that go with some of this stuff as well. So just be aware of that. You know, don't keep the handshake going for too long so that it becomes awkward. You know, a couple of pumps should be plenty. Eye contact is really important, and again, a nice smile is really quite important with the handshake.
So how would you suggest, we've gone through the process, we've introduced ourselves initially, we've prepared thoroughly, and we get to the end. It might be the end of the 20 minutes or the 45 minutes that we've reconfirmed at the start of the meeting, Tonya. How would you suggest that our audience should conclude these meetings?
Well, the first thing is to be really appreciative and acknowledge the person's time. You know, so really thank them in in a really genuine manner. Ask the person if they have a business card and if they're happy for you to contact them again. Now, a couple of you in your registrations asked about maintaining contacts, and I think that's a really important point. So we'll come to that in a moment. The other thing that's really the whole point of this scenario is that you want to then ask your interviewee if they know of anyone else that you could potentially contact. So that's really vital part of this whole process, so that you can then grow your network, so you can really expand that networking net, if you like. And then, of course, because you've met this first person, you can use their name as a referral when you're connecting with that secondary person in that secondary circle.
And how might that then flow on to after the meeting, Tonya? What would you do after you've had the meeting? You've thanked them for their time. You've asked them if it's okay to swap a business card and if you can contact them again. And you've asked them if they've got any other folk that they suggest you might be able to speak with. What could you do after the entire interview when you've concluded that physical process?
After that, again, follow up with a thank you email. That's a really important part of it. Again, just genuinely thanking that individual for their time, maybe making reference to some of the key points that you discussed, something that you really valued from that interaction. The other thing that's really important is to reflect on the experience, especially when you're first starting out. So to really think about how it went. You know, did you get the information you were looking for? Was the job what you thought it would be? Did it include tasks that you'd enjoy? Can you see yourself in the industry? Did you present professionally? Did the conversation flow naturally? What worked? What didn't work? What could you have done better? Do you need to gather more information? So just important to sort of reflect on how it all went and the impression you think you made.
Okay.
And the last, sorry, Gary.
Oh, Caddy's just asking a question that's relevant to what you're saying right now. So I'm just checking with Caddy that that the response that Tonya's giving right now just happened to immediately align with the question you posted, Caddy. So if you wouldn't mind just sending me a message to let me know if we have answered that question or if we need Tonya to add a little bit more information for you. So please continue, Tonya.
Okay. So, and the last point is keeping records of who you speak to, because when you meet lots of people at lots of different conferences or networking events, it is really easy to lose track of who said what and when. So keeping some sort of networking log, which you can see a little bit of an example of in that slide there. So just to help you remember and reflect, and sometimes your interviewee might actually say, look, I think I know someone who's going to be looking for a graduate around about October. You should contact them then. So it's just a really good way of managing those timelines and reminding yourself so you can follow up on those opportunities. Because so often we have these fantastic opportunities that come our way and we just let them slip away. And it's really important part of networking is you need to pounce on those opportunities when they're presented to you.
And folks, just as the preparation side of things is critical, something such as a networking log, which is a piece of work to do, it's amazing the difference it makes to the overall journey that you're on in terms of securing jobs that are the sort of jobs that you want to have the career that you want to have. These small bits of work matter, and I can't encourage you enough to follow Tonya's advice to create a little log like this, particularly when someone refers you to someone else. When you catch up with that someone else, it's handy to know when you'd actually met with the referrer, so you can bring that up in the conversation. So the work that you do post-event like this, post-meeting like this, can make a significant difference in the way that you're seen to be a professional, which relates a lot to personal branding. And Tonya, I know that you'd like to speak with the audience about personal branding.
Yeah, personal branding is vital when it comes to networking. But just in terms of how you're presenting in your profession as a whole, and as amazing as social media is in terms of making connections with people, it's also a really good way to ruin your professional image as well. So I feel that we can't talk about the topic of networking without touching on this a little bit. And I'm sure, we've all heard funny stories about Facebook comments and photos of getting people into trouble with their employers and perhaps ruining their chances of getting a job. So it's really important that you don't let that happen to you. So just, make sure you check your privacy settings and limit who can see your profile. Clean up your profile. That's really important as well. Look at the photos that are there. Look at the comments that are there. I recently did a seminar about networking, and one of the students offered to give a little bit of his experience, and he was saying he was in a job interview recently, and just at the end of the interview, when he thought everything was going really, really well, the interviewer said with a bit of a grin, "So what's with the photos of you dressed as a priest?" And
yes.
He said, what do you mean? And he said it suddenly dawned on him that he'd seen some very inappropriate photos on his Facebook site. And luckily the employer had quite a good sense of humour about it and didn't seem to sort of hold it against him too much. But that was a very valuable lesson for that young man, and he was very quick to go home and change his privacy settings and delete quite a few bits and pieces of his Facebook page. So just something to be careful of. So I think all of those points have sort of been covered. The last point about developing a LinkedIn profile, I think, is really important. LinkedIn is basically professional Facebook, if you like. And a couple of you, as I mentioned earlier, I think it was Sherry, maybe Jake, we talked about how to maintain connections with people you meet through networking. And LinkedIn is an amazing way to make those connections last. And Gary, what would you like to sort of say about LinkedIn there?
Well, LinkedIn is by far the most powerful professional network that you can be part of, and my experience over time with a lot of students is that they think that LinkedIn's not for them until they get a job, and in fact they couldn't be more wrong about that. It's absolutely critical that students access LinkedIn while you're a student, and for reasons such as following up from your information interviews is one, but also as being seen as being a member of a community and a profession prior to graduating. So in joining LinkedIn, it's important to join 2 to 4 relevant groups that are part of the profession and the direction that you want to go in your career, and once a week or once a fortnight participate in some conversations in those groups. Over time, you might notice that certain people continue to be involved in the same conversations as you, and a lot of students also don't realise that professionals like to hear what students think, because while you're studying, quite often you're getting exposed to current research that maybe hasn't flowed through to the professional networks yet. So you might actually be a source of up-to-date research on your profession that even the professionals haven't had access to yet. So you can make really valid contributions to those group discussions. Now, you need to have a long-term approach to LinkedIn. If you connect with people and ask to meet them tomorrow and you haven't really built any form of a relationship, you'll probably put them off in a very similar way as Tonya has described at the start with regards to asking someone for a job at the moment that you meet them. So please don't use LinkedIn like that. See it as a slow process for building online to what I would call offline relationships, which are your face-to-face relationships. So get to know people. Notice the folk that you're connecting with continually on the discussions in the relevant groups. Over time, maybe a 3 to 6 month period, you might then send them a message. Clearly you will have also connected with them, and you might ask them if it's possible to catch up for an information interview. And you can build your network that way, and you never know, as you can see from these information interviews, where that can take your relationship over time. So have a slow approach to them, but build them up. A couple of last final points are, rather than using the generic connect button, always personalize your connect messages, and when someone does connect with you, send them a thank you message for connecting with you. And if you have something like a blog, it's in that reply thank you message. You can actually put a link to your blog as part of your signature, and I do know of graduating students where the very fact that they've had a regular blog that's relevant to their career space has gotten them a job above their competitors. So there's just a few tips there, Tonya.
Excellent advice, Gary.
So you'd like to hear some thoughts from the audience?
Yeah, so one thing about networking is it's all very good and well in theory, but again, it's one of those things that's really easy to just sort of let it slip and slide and not actually do anything as a result. So what I'd really like to do is to get our audience members thinking about one thing that they can actually put into action, one action item.
So folks, if you wouldn't mind please just typing in some actions that you're going to take away from today's webinar. And you has just asked, how would you use Manage LinkedIn to connect with people? Have you got just a quick comment on that, Tonya? Thanks you for your question.
Yeah, one of the examples I'll give is just this morning actually I was looking at my LinkedIn account, and I am part of lots of different LinkedIn groups. So for example, the Australian Human Resources Institute has a LinkedIn group, and so pretty much every day someone posts a request for assistance or advice, or they post an article that might be of interest to the entire group. So really looking at LinkedIn groups that are connected with your profession is something that I would really recommend. It's a good way to sort of be out there, see who's in your industry, and also to get some really valuable professional insights in yourself.
Terrific suggestion, and Viv has said that she is going to update her LinkedIn profile. Just on that point, folks, in the coming weeks through Organisations That Matter, I'll be hosting a complimentary webinar for folk to be able to learn how to have a useful LinkedIn profile. So thanks for sharing that, Viv. We've also got people that are going to connect with other folk. That's really valuable. We've got Anthea has said that she has actually just joined a panel with CPA Australia, which I learned about through the Vic Division's LinkedIn group. Well done. And over the next few months, I plan to develop relationships with my co-panel members. And that's a terrific approach, Anthea, to see the long-term view of that connection. And Tonya, have you got anything else to add to Anthea's actions?
No, but I think that's, that's quite inspiring, and that's a perfect example of how you can use networking and perhaps start identifying people that you could connect with and maybe set up some information interviewing.
Hugh says that he or she is going to attend a networking session next week and also update LinkedIn straight away.
Excellent.
Jan says that he or she is going to connect with us on LinkedIn, so that's a really valid point. I'm sure, Tonya, you're comfortable with folk connecting with you, LinkedIn. I know I certainly am.
Sure.
So please feel free to connect with us both, and feel free to even look at the profiles as maybe a potential guide to get you going. And Felicity Becker is encouraging everyone to attend next week's networking event, which we will talk about at the end of this webinar. Kathy is talking about investing in proper attire and makes sure that she is groomed professionally, as well as being aware of her non-verbal behaviours. And she sees this as something that is relatively easy to do. So thanks for sharing that, Kathy.
Really good points there.
And at the moment, that's the actions from everyone. I've just got Sherry is going to reach out to old friends as well as family members who are in the industry. So that's terrific, Sherry. That's a point from very early on in the webinars. Thanks for clearly taking some notes early on and referencing them right now.
Excellent point.
So at the moment, that's all of the actions from our participants that they've been able to share so far.
Great points. Really, really well done.
Okay, what would be some final tips you would have for everyone? Tonya?
Okay. Now, before I go into my list of final points, there's just a couple of the questions that some of the participants listed in their registration that I might not have had a really good chance to sort of address as yet. Jake asked a really good question that I think is something that we've all probably struggled with before at a conference or in a networking event, and that is how to enter a conversation consisting entirely of people who you do not know. And that is an incredibly intimidating situation when you're at a conference and you're there on your own, and breaking into a group and sort of making that first step is really intimidating. I've actually just quite simply gone up to a group before and said, "Hi everyone, you look like a friendly bunch. Is it okay if I join you?" It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that.
Yes.
And then really it's just about asking questions. Isn't it really, Gary, just to sort of connect with people?
Absolutely. Ask questions. In fact, here's another tip, folks, is that the better you get at asking questions, the better your listening becomes. So if you ask questions and you genuinely want to hear what people have to say, your listening improves, and listening is one of the most critical communication skills that you need to develop to help you not only get jobs but also advance your careers.
Absolutely. And just remember too, as scary as it is sort of going into a group at one of those events, everyone's there to network. That's why everyone's there.
Yes.
To meet other people. So on the whole, you'll find that people will be quite open and will welcome you into their conversations and into their groups. So just be brave. that would be my piece of advice there. Just one other question I wanted to address was from, I think it was from Lisa, who asked how to find positions that are not advertised. And I think, you know, again, that's an important thing to address just because we're talking about the topic of networking and obviously, you know, remembering that employers would rather not advertise on Seek if they don't have to. So
yes.
Approaching employers directly is absolutely acceptable. A lot of employers these days will list vacancies on their websites before they go to the mainstream job search sites. So building up a list of who you would like to work for is a really important approach. A lot of organisations also have what are called employee referral programs. So again, that's simply where before going and advertising on Seek, organisations will let all their current employees know that there's a vacancy, and if one of those employees can refer a friend or an acquaintance who works out in that role, then that person will then get a bit of a bonus of some sort in their salaries as a thank you, because that actually works out cheaper and more time efficient than advertising on Seek. So just a couple of tips in terms of identifying those non-advertised opportunities. And again, the more people you know, the more people in your network, the more chance there is about hearing about those non-advertised opportunities. Okay, so just in terms of going into some final tips for networking, just, you know, constantly expanding your network. Remember that people aren't necessarily going to know immediately who you are when you run into them, so just making an effort to keep in touch with them and remind them who you are. And a good way to do that might just be if you come across an interesting article or you hear about a seminar or session that's coming up that they might be interested in, just letting them know about that. Keeping in touch with people who've given you job hunting advice and providing them with feedback. So when you go for an interview, and you know, you can let that person know that you did that information interview with a while ago. Let them know how the job interview went, because they want to know, they're interested. Checking out the market, doing your research, finding out who the key players are, keeping records, which we've already talked about, being really important. The other thing is setting goals. There's nothing more powerful than actually writing a to-do list and then ticking those off. That's a really good feeling when you can actually say that you've accomplished what you wanted to. So, you know, it could be I'm going to attend 2 events this month, or I'm going to conduct 3 information interviews before the end of the year. Things like that. So really solid goals that you can really achieve. And just lastly, just constantly managing your personal brand. So constantly being aware of how you're presenting as a professional.
And again, folks, you cannot underestimate the reality that prospective employers, prospective folk that you might want to do an information interview with will look you up on Facebook. They will look you up to see if you have a LinkedIn profile. Just another point about LinkedIn too, folks, is that LinkedIn and Google work very closely together. So if you have a LinkedIn profile and you will find that you will rank #1 if no one else with your name has as up-to-date a profile as you do on LinkedIn. So it's an easy way to have a #1 Google ranking. I know, for example, I have a very common name, Gary Ryan, and there are some very famous Gary Ryans in various industries. But because I have the most up-to-date LinkedIn profile, my LinkedIn profile ranks #1 on Google, despite me having a very common name. So knowing technically some of these things that go on in the background is also one of the things to consider. And also just know employers will look you up, so that representing that personal brand, as Tonya has just said, is absolutely critical.
Skill endorsements are great too, aren't they, Gary?
Oh, yes.
So having, you know, people that you've worked with in the past endorse you for various professional expertise is a fantastic thing. So, you know, for example, with some of my contacts, because I've worked with them in the past and they've seen me present, they'll endorse me for public speaking, for example. So anyone looking at my profile will actually see that I've got, you know, a few people that have actually endorsed or supported that skill set, which I know is something that potential employers would look at very favourably.
Absolutely. And so therefore you have to have your skills listed in order for them to be endorsed. So that's another specific thing about LinkedIn that we can touch on at another time. Did you want to talk through those resources that you mentioned earlier in the webinar, Tonya?
Yeah, absolutely. So these are just a couple of resources that you can access from Monash's Employment and Career Development website, which is just simply the Monash homepage /careers. So we've got lots and lots of resources there, but a couple that are specific to our discussion today. The first one is a series of resources called Using Your Degree. Now, in Using Your Degree, you can get a list of skills that are specific to particular discipline areas. You can get lists of job titles connected with graduate outcomes from those degrees. But the really juicy stuff is probably on the second page, and that is lists of potential employers. So the lists are based on where Monash graduates have told us they've gone on to get employers. So again, I mentioned earlier about building a list of employers that you would like to work for potentially, so that's a good starting point. And the other thing that's listed on those resources are professional associations. So you might actually be surprised to see that there's more than just one professional association with a lot of professions. The second link there is a resource that gives specific questions that you can ask in an information interview. So I touched on some of them earlier, but it's a more extensive list, and it will be quite good to sort of inspire you when you are sort of developing your own list.
Okay. We have another question from, just checking this, from Kwai Chu. It says, "Hi Tonya, are those jobs which have not been advertised are normally not very important?" Kwai Chu's asking whether those jobs are maybe they're not being advertised because they're not important. So just clarifying that.
No, absolutely not. As I said, in some industries, that's the way it's done. They don't advertise vacancies at all, and that includes quite high-level professional jobs. So, yeah, so no, unadvertised or the hidden job market covers all range of jobs, whether it be just casual part-time retail and hospitality jobs, right up to very high-level management roles.
Yes, and I'd back up that statement too. Definitely. Look, part of the theory is that our people will know good people. This is the theory that a lot of organisations have, and they can actually save a lot of money through saving agency fees and recruitment fees by having good people referred to them throughout the organisation's own networks. That's it is a couple of the driving factors as to why organisations use the informal network to recruit folk.
Absolutely.
We'd like to just see if there are any final questions. We still have just a few more minutes up our sleeve here for today's webinar. Do you have any final questions that, for whatever reason, we haven't been able to address so far? We've got a couple of minutes for Tonya to be able to speak to any final questions that you might have. So simply type them in, and we'll feel very happy to address them for you. So just give you a moment to do that. Just checking if there's any final questions that at this point in time we haven't addressed for you and you would really love us to have an opportunity to answer for you. It's looking clear at this stage. So Tonya, it would appear that you've done a marvellous job in addressing the whole topic of information interviewing for our audience. I'm just giving them another 10 seconds as an opportunity. We might have potentially a long question and it takes a little bit of time to type in. I'll just give you a few more moments, folks, to complete your questions if you have any. Yan Chen has a question for us. Is career objective required on your CV? Tonya, is career objective required on your CV?
Okay, well, little bit off topic, but I'm happy to give some feedback on that one. Is it required? It's not required, no. I know that quite often people do struggle to write effective career objectives, and normally they are the first part of a resume after the contact details. So if a career objective is not tailored and not written beautifully with perfect grammar and expression, then a career objective can make a very bad impression very quickly, and in some cases can result in employers and recruiters to not continue reading a resume. So it does depend on your writing confidence and your ability to tailor an objective for a specific role in a specific organisation. Usually when you're applying for an advertised role, you'll be submitting a cover letter with your resume, and that tends to be the place to sort of write in paragraph form, whereas a resume tends to be more about short, sharp statements. And the word resume itself is a French word that means summary. So on the whole, you know, it's not a terrible thing, and it's perfectly fine to include a career objective. So just being very aware of your capabilities and whether or not it's going to make a good impression is probably the main thing you need to think about there.
Terrific, Tonya. And Yu Hua asks, you mentioned that asking questions is recommended, but what's the line between showing interest and asking too much?
It's a very fine line. And I guess that's where that active listening comes in. You know, you need to ask a question and then spend time listening to the answer and showing that you are actually taking in that information. That's really important. I guess, again, the time limit, if you have set up an information interview, it's just being respectful of the time and not sort of going over that time limit, because then your interviewee might become a little bit irritated or annoyed. So that's probably the thing there. And of course, just keeping your questions respectful and professional and not sort of too personal. I guess that can also make people feel a little bit uncomfortable if you don't know them very well.
Fantastic response, Tonya. I couldn't agree more. And certainly on your first point with the answer, we also need to be aware of our timing here and respectful of folks' time today. So we're just about at the end of our journey for today's webinar. We'd just like to share some important information with you about the post-webinar networking event. So here is a physical opportunity, folks, for you to come along and put the skills that Tonya has been expressing into action. So next Thursday, the 29th of August, from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. at the Monash Conference Centre on level 11 at 30 Collins Street in Melbourne. If you'd like to go along, please RSVP and provide any questions to Felicity Becker at alumnimentoring@monash.edu or phone +613 9903 4143. It's an opportunity to practice your networking skills in the supportive company of your fellow program participants, get to know other mentors and mentees over drinks and refreshments, and to discuss the content of today's webinar with other audience participants. So please, folks, get along Thursday the 29th of August from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. at the Monash Conference Centre at level 11, 30 Collins Street in Melbourne. You have some contact details too for Felicity Becker, who's the Alumni Programs Coordinator. So you've got your contact details directly there for you, and I know Felicity is absolutely open to having all of you contact her directly. And we also would like to provide the contact details for Tonya Wimhurst, the Careers Education Consultant, who has been our marvellous and inspiring guest today with our information interviewing. So please feel free to contact Tonya there. Folks, that takes us to the end of our journey. We'd like to thank you all for participating, and most of all, we would like to thank Tonya Wimhurst for her wonderful preparation and information that has been provided today on information interviewing. Tonya, are there any last comments you'd like to share with our audience?
No, I'd just like to say thank you so much. I really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you to our participants for their questions and for their contribution. That's really helped things along and made it even more interactive and interesting. So thank you, and thank you to you, Gary, for being such a wonderful host.
Not a problem. I've really enjoyed the experience. Once again, folks, thanks a great deal for coming along and participating with us. We hope you've got a lot of value out of today. We've got a lot of thank yous coming through, Tonya, so thank you, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you next Thursday evening at the City offices of Monash University on Collins Street. Thanks again, folks. Thanks again, Tonya. And thanks again, everyone, for participating. Look out for this recording, which will be available next week for you to access through the Monash University website. Thanks again, folks.